It's Huckleberry, Huckleberry, Huckleberry Finn. Huckleberry, Huckleberry, Huckleberry Finn. Getting into trouble as if trouble were his friend. It's Huckleberry, Huckleberry, Huckleberry Finn.
Well, after we left the Grangerfords and escaped all that terrible feuding, we just floated along, free and comfortable. And the days slid so quiet and smooth and lovely. It was a monstrous big river down there, sometimes 1.5 miles wide. We run nights and laid up and hid daytimes, so's nobody would spot Jim and take him for a runaway slave. We fished and swum a lot and kept a good eye on the river, watching the daylight come. Not a sound anywheres. Perfectly still. Just like the whole world was asleep. Only sometimes the bullfrogs are cluttering maybe. So we'd put in the day lazing around, listening to the stillness. At night, we just floated along, sometimes with that whole river all to ourselves for the longest time. Gee, it's lovely to live on a raft. We had the sky up there, all speckled with stars. Boy, Jim, just look at those stars. There must be a zillion of them.
There sure is a lot of them, Huck.
Do you suppose they was made, Jim, or only just happened?
I don't know, Huck. I reckon they was made.
I bet they just happened. Why, it would have took too long to make so many.
Well, the moon could have laid them, maybe.
Well, I guess that's reasonable, Jim. I've seen a frog lay most as many, so, of course, it could be done.
Look at that one fall, Huck. Streaking down the sky.
Wow. What do you suppose makes them fall like that, Jim?
I allow they got spoiled and was hove out of the nest.
Once or twice a night, we'd see a steamboat slipping along in the dark. And now and then she'd belch a whole world of sparks up out of her chimblies. And they would rain down in the river and look awful pretty. One morning about daybreak, I took the canoe along the river, looking for some berries. I paddled a little ways up a creek amongst some cypress woods, when all of a sudden, here comes a couple of men tearing up the path alongside the creek. I thought I was a goner, for whenever anybody was after somebody else, I judged it was me, or maybe Jim.
Oh, save us! Don't let them catch us!
We didn't do anything. Help us. They've got dogs a-coming.
Won't you help us, boy? Let us get in your canoe.
Go up along the edge of the creek a ways, then wade down to me and get in. That'll throw the dogs off the scent. They done it, and when they clum aboard, we lit out for the river and hid in the cottonwoods where Jim and me was camped. One of these fellas was about 70 or upwards and had a bald head and very gray whiskers. He had an old battered-up slouch hat on and a greasy blue woolen shirt, ragged old breeches stuffed into his boot tops. The other fellow was about 30 and dressed about as ornery. After breakfast, we all laid off and talked. And the first thing that come out was that these chaps didn't know one another.
What got you into trouble?
Well, I've been selling an article to take the tartar off the teeth. And it does take it off, too. But generally, the enamel comes right along with it. Yeah, I was sliding out of town when I ran across you on the trail. And you told me they were coming after you. So, expecting trouble, I decided to scatter out with you. Now, that's my story. What's yours?
Well, I've been running a little temperance revival there about for a week, making it mighty warm for them what like their jugs, and taking as much as $5 or $6 a night, 10 cents a head, children and slaves free. Business a-growing all the time. And somehow or other, a story got around last night that I had a way of putting in my time with a private jug on the sly, which was true. So I decided to leave before they give me a going-away party with tar and feathers.
well, old man, I reckon we might double team it. What do you think?
I ain't opposed to it. What's your line, mainly?
Oh, I do a little in patent medicines. Theater actor. Tragedy, mostly. Take a turn at hypnotism when there's a chance. Teach singing geography school for a change. Sling a lecture sometimes. Oh, I do a lot of things. Most anything that comes in handy, just so it ain't work. Well, what's your lay?
Well, I've done considerable in the doctoring way in my time. Laying on of hands is my best hope for cancer and paralysis and such things. I can tell a fortune pretty good when I got somebody along to find out the facts for me. Preaching's my line, too, and working revival meetings and missionarying.
Well, after these two rapscallions got through reciting all their lines of business, nobody never said anything for a while. But pretty soon the young man began to groan and sigh and look awful mournful.
What are you moaning about?
To think I should have lived to be leading such a life, to be degraded down to such company.
Well, ain't our company good enough for you?
Oh, I don't blame you, gentlemen, far from it. I don't blame anybody. I deserve it all. Oh, that I should have been brought so low.
Janet, what are you talking about?
Someday I'll lie down in my grave and forget my past, and my poor broken heart will be at rest.
Broken heart? What are you heaving your poor broken heart at us for? We ain't done nothing.
Oh, I ain't blaming you. I brought myself down, yes. I did it myself. It's right I should suffer. Perfectly right.
Brought down from where? Where was you brought down from?
You wouldn't believe me. Let it pass. It's no matter. The secret of my birth.
The secret of your birth? You mean to say...
Gentlemen, I will reveal the secret of my birth to you. By rights, I am a duke.
Why, blame my cats.
Wow! A duke!
Yes, my great-grandfather, eldest son of the Duke of Bridgewater, fled to this country years ago. I am the descendant of him. I am the rightful Duke of Bridgewater. And here I am, forlorn, fallen from my high estate, hunted by men, ragged, worn, heartbroken, despised by the cold world, degraded to the company of runaways on a raft.
What can we do for you, Duke?
We ain't never met up with any dukes before.
It's no use. I've fallen, and I know I'll never occupy my lofty position again. The world is cruel.
Ain't there anything we can do for you?
No, there's nothing you can do. It would make me feel better if you would only recognize my former high estate.
What do you mean? How can we do it?
Well, you should bow when you address a duke. Say, Your Grace, or My Lord, or Your Lordship, or even plain Bridgewater.
Well, we done what the Duke said. All through dinner, Jim stood around and waited on him, and I called him by his title, and a body could see it was mighty pleasing to him. But the old man got pretty silent by and by, and appeared mighty troubled about all the attention the Duke was a-getting.
Looky here, Bilgewater. I'm mighty sorry for you, but you ain't the only person on this raft that's had trouble.
No?
No, you ain't. And you ain't the only person that's been snaked down wrongfully out of a high place. And you ain't the only person that's had a secret surrounding his birth.
Why, what do you mean?
Bilgewater, can I trust you?
To the bitter death?
Bilgewater, I am the late Dolphin.
You're what?
Yes, friends, it's too true. Your eyes is looking at this very moment on the poor, disappeared Dolphin. Louis the 17th, the son of Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette.
Why, blame my cats. More royalty.
And I thought we didn't have no kings here.
Why, you must be well over 100 years old.
Trouble has done it, Bilgewater. Trouble has done it. Trouble has brung these gray hairs and this premature balditude. Yes, gentlemen, you see before you the wandering, exiled, trampled on it, suffering rightful King of France.
Well, we tried to comfort him too, and started calling him Your Majesty, and waiting on him first. This done him heaps of good, and so he got cheerful and comfortable. But the Duke kind of soured on him, and didn't look a bit satisfied.
Why, your great-grandfather and all them other dukes of Bilgewater was very friendly with my father. They was allowed to come to our palace, considerable. Don't be sour, Bilgewater. Like as not, we got to be together a blame long time on this raft. It ain't my fault I weren't born a duke, and it ain't your fault you weren't born a king. So what's the use to worry? Come, give us your hand, Duke, and let's all be friends.
Well, all right.
The king and Duke, they made up, and it took away all the uncomfortableness, and we felt mighty good over it, 'cause it would have been a miserable business to have any unfriendliness on the raft. It didn't take me long to make up my mind that these liars weren't no kings nor dukes at all, but just low-down humbugs and frauds. But I never said nothing, never let on, but kept it to myself. It's the best way. Then you don't have no quarrels and don't get into no trouble. The king and Duke wondered why we only traveled at night and hid up days. So I told them we was going down below New Orleans, and that Jim was my slave and that I was taking him along with me to live with my Uncle Ben. I told him that since folks might get to thinking Jim was a runaway slave, we only traveled at night to avoid trouble. Well, they believed me and let the thing ride. They played a heap of cards, but got tired of that, and allowed they'd lay out a campaign, as they called it.
Well, Bilgewater, got any suggestions?
Let me see here.
You got quite a handful of posters there. What's this? The celebrated Dr. Armand de Montalban of Paris will lecture on the science of magic. Who's that, Bilgewater?
Why, that's me.
Here's another one. The world-renowned Shakespearean tragedian, Garrick the Younger of Drury Lane, London.
That's me also. Have you ever trod the boards, royalty?
I beg your pardon?
Have you ever acted on the stage?
No.
You shall then before you're 3 days older, fallen grandeur. The first good town we come to, we'll hire a hall and do the sword fight in Richard III and the balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet. How does that strike you?
Well, I'm for anything that'll pay, but I don't know much about it. See, I was too small when Pap used to have plays at the palace in France. You reckon you can learn me?
Easy. Now, I usually do the part of Romeo, so you'll have to play Juliet.
Wasn't that just a young gal? My bald head and white whiskers gonna look uncommon odd on her, maybe.
Don't you worry. When you're in costume, that makes all the difference in the world. Besides, Juliet's in a balcony. Let's see. Here's your costume.
Well, the king was satisfied, so the Duke got out his book and read the parts over in a splendid way, prancing around and acting at the same time to show how it had to be done. Then he give the book to the king and told him to memorize his part. There was a little one-horse town about 3 miles down the bend, so me and the king and the Duke got in the canoe and went to look her over. The place was nearly deserted, 'cause everybody that warn't too young or too sick or too old was gone to a meeting about 2 miles back in the woods. It was a religious meeting. Well, the Duke stayed to get some printing done in town, but the king 'lowed he'd go and work that camp meeting for all it was worth, and I decided to go too. There was a big crowd at the meeting, and they was pretty well warmed up by the time we got there, with a preacher shouting and the people groaning and crying and saying,
Let me have an amen, sisters and brothers, amen. Oh, come to the mourner's bench. I say, come like what's in there. Come sick and sore, let me hear an amen there, brothers and sisters. Come lame and halt and blind. Come poor and needy. Sunk in shame. The doors of heaven stand open, sisters and brothers, let me hear amen.
Hallelujah!
Well, the first I know, the king got a going, and you could hear him over everybody. And next he went a-charging up onto the preacher's platform and began speaking to the crowd.
Brothers and sisters,
Standing before you is the blackest sinner of all. You're not gonna believe me when I tell you. I'm a pirate. That's right, brothers and sisters, and I've been a pirate for 30 years out to the Indian Ocean. My pirate crew was thinned out considerable last spring in a fight. I was coming to take out some fresh men. Thanks to goodness, last night I was robbed and put ashore off a steamboat without a cent. But I'm glad of it now. It was the blessedest thing that ever happened to me, 'cause I'm a changed man and happy for the first time in my life. I'm poor now, brothers and sisters, but I'm a-going to start right off and work my way back to the Indian Ocean and put in the rest of my life trying to turn other pirates into the true path. And every time I convert a pirate, I'm a-going to say to him, don't you thank me? Don't you give me no credit? It all belongs to them dear people in Polkville and that dear preacher there. The truest friend a pirate ever had.
Good idea. Pass the hat.
Yes, collection over here. Yes, let him pass the hat.
So the king went all through the crowd with his hat, swabbing his eyes and blessing the people, and praising them too, and thanking them for being so good to the poor old pirates away off. People invited him to stay a week and live in their houses. But he told them he was in a great sweat to get to the Indian Ocean right off and go to work on the pirates. Well, when we got back to the raft and he come to count up, he found he had collected $87.75. The king said, take it all around, it laid over any day he'd ever put in the missionary line. Why, he said heathens don't amount to shucks alongside of pirates to work a camp meeting. Well, when the king and duke finished celebrating with their jug and fell asleep, Jim says,
Huck, do you reckon we's going to run across any more kings on this trip?
no, I reckon not.
Well, that's all right then. I don't mind 1 or 2 kings, but that's enough. This one's powerful drunk, and the duke ain't much better.
I found Jim had been trying to get the king to talk French so he could hear what it was like. But the king said he'd been in this country so long and had so much trouble, he'd forgot it. While the king was being a pirate at the camp meeting, the duke had been in town at the printing office, making up some more posters. One of them describing Jim as a runaway from down below New Orleans, saying there was a reward and expenses for his return. That way the duke said we could travel by day, and if anybody got curious about Jim, we'd just show him the poster and say we was taking him back. It seemed like a right smart idea. Well, the duke kept helping the king get ready for their big show, learning him over and over and over again how to say a Shakespeare.
Romeo.
Now, you mustn't bellow out Romeo that way like a bull. Say it soft and thick and languishy. Romeo. You don't bray like a jackass.
Romeo.
That's better. Now let's practice a sword fight from Richard III. That always fetches the house.
This here raft's a mighty small stage.
Here's your sword.
Okay, Bilgewater. Now what do we do?
Well, the way they laid on and pranced around the raft was grand to see. But by and by the king tripped and fell overboard.
I'm drowning.
One morning, when we was pretty well down the state of Arkansas, we come in sight of a little one-horse town in a big bend. The king and the duke reckoned this'd be a good place for their show. We struck it mighty lucky. There was going to be a circus there that afternoon, and the country people was already beginning to come in. The duke, he hired the courthouse, and we went around and stuck up our posters. Then I went to the circus, which was the bulliest circus I ever did see. Well, that night we had our show, but there weren't only about 12 people there.
Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?
Why, Juliet couldn't be less than 400 years old. Why, I do believe this Juliet has a beard.
Oh, Romeo, with love shall I hear more, or shall I speak at this?
We've heard enough. Let's get on with the sword fight. Romeo against Juliet.
The people laughed all the time, and that made the duke mad. That night, after everybody left, except one boy which was asleep, the duke come up with a new plan.
These Arkansas lunkheads can't come up to Shakespeare. What they want is low comedy or something else. I reckon
Well, what do you have in mind, Bilgewater?
we'll put on a show tomorrow that these folks won't ever forget. Here, give me some paper.
Well, the duke made a handbill announcing the Royal Nonsuch. Admission 50 cents. Then at the bottom was the biggest line of all, which said, "Ladies and children not admitted."
There. If that line don't fetch 'em, I don't know Arkansas.
Well, it did fetch 'em, too. That place was plumb filled with men, and everybody expecting quite a show. The duke, he gave a little speech and praised up this tragedy and told 'em all about Edmund Kean the Elder, which was the king. And finally he rolled up the curtain. By jingo! The next minute, the king comes a-prancing out on all fours, naked as a jaybird. And he was painted all over, ring-streaked and striped, all sorts of colors, and splendid as a rainbow. Oh, it was just wild but awful funny. The people most killed themselves laughing. He cavorted around that stage till it'd make a cow laugh to see the shines that old idiot cut. Then the curtain come down.
What? Is it over?
Is that all? We've been cheated!
Hold on, gentlemen. We are sold, mighty badly sold, but we don't want to be the laughing stock of this whole town.
He's right.
Now, let's leave here quiet-like and talk up this show and sell the rest of the town. Then we'll all be in the same boat. Ain't that sensible?
Bet it is. The judge is right.
All right, then, not a word about this evening. Go along home, tell everybody to come and see the Royal Nonsuch for themselves.
Next day, you couldn't hear nothing around that town but how splendid that show was. And the next night, the house was just packed again, fuller'n a tick. And the same thing happened. Well, the third night, the house was crammed again. But they weren't newcomers this time, but people that was at the show the other 2 nights. And I see that every man that went in had his pockets bulging or something hidden under his coat. And I see it weren't no perfumery neither. Wow! Whew! I smelt rotten eggs by the barrel, and spoiled cabbages and such things. And if I know the signs of a dead cat, there was 64 of them that went in. And I knew that the king was really going to get it. When the place couldn't hold no more people, the duke started around for the stage door. I after him. But the minute we turned the corner and was in the dark, he says,
Walk fast now till you get away from the houses, and then shin for the raft like the Dickens was after you.
"But what about the poor king? I reckon he's in for a pretty rough time of it."
Don't you worry about the king. Now you just skedaddle.
Well, I ran like everything and got to the raft at about the same time as the duke. And we jumped aboard and lit out for the big water. gliding downstream, nobody saying a word. I was feeling pretty sorry for the king, when all of a sudden he crawls out from the wigwam.
Well, how'd the old thing pan out this time, Bilgewater?
Why, you weren't in town at all.
Nope.
Those greenhorns. I knew the first crowd would keep mum and let the rest of the town get roped in. And I knew that they'd lay for us tonight and considered it was their turn now. Well, it is their turn, and I'm mighty sorry we couldn't be there for the picnic. They brought plenty of provisions.
Huckleberry, Huck and his friend Jim met up with a pair of travelers, very crafty men. One of them said he's a duke, the other king of France. But who would think a king would dance the royal non-such dance?
Them rapscallions took in $465 in those 3 nights. I never see money hauled in by the wagon load like that before. By and by, when they was asleep and snoring, Jim says,
Don't it surprise you the way them kings carries on, Huck?
"Nah, don't, Jim."
It don't. How come, Huck?
Well, it don't, 'cause it's in the breed. I reckon they're all alike.
But these kings of ours is regular rapscallions. That's just what they is. They's regular rapscallions.
Well, that's what I'm a-saying. All kings is mostly rapscallions, as far as I can make out.
Is that so?
Well, you read about 'em once, you'll see. Look at Henry VIII. Why, this'n of ours is a Sunday school superintendent compared to Henry. You ought to seen old Henry VIII when he was in bloom. He was a blossom. He used to marry a new wife every day and chop off her head next morning. And he'd do it just as indifferent as if he was ordering up eggs. That's the kind of a bug Henry was. And if we'd 'a' had him aboard instead of our king, Henry would have done worse than just fool that town. All I say is, kings is kings, and you gotta make allowances. Take 'em all around. They're a mighty ornery lot. It's the way they're raised.
But this king do smell so, Huck.
Well, they all do, Jim. Oh, we can't help the way a king smells. History don't tell no way.
And this Duke, he's a roughin' too.
When he's drunk, there ain't no nearsighted man could tell him from a king.
Well, I don't hanker for no more of 'em, Huck. These two is all I can stand.
I felt the same way as Jim. Oh, what was the use to tell Jim these weren't real kings and dukes? It wouldn't have done no good. Besides, it was just as I said. You couldn't tell them from the real ones. By this time, I somehow got to talking to Jim about his wife and young'uns, who were still in slavery.
Sometimes, Huck, I gets to thinking about the time I treated my little Elizabeth so ornery. She was only about 4 years old and got the scarlet fever and had a powerful rough spell. One day when she was better, she was standing around and I says to her, "Shut the door." She never done it. She just stood there, kind of smiling up at me. Made me so mad, and I says again, mighty loud, "Shut the door." But she just kept on a smiling, and I was aboard, and I says, "I'll lay I'll make you mine." And I fetched her a slap side the head that sent her sprawling. I left room in a huff, and when I come back, she was crying. But there was that door standing open yet. My, but I was mad. I was just going to grab that child. But just then, a wind come in and slam it to, behind the child. Kablam! And that child never moved. Oh, Huck, my breath most hop out of me. I sneaked around behind the child, soft and still, and all of a sudden I said, "Pow!" Oh, Lordy, Huck. I bust out a-crying and grab her up in my arms and say, "Oh, you poor little thing. Forgive your old daddy." But she was plumb deaf and dumb, Huck. Plumb deaf and dumb. And I'd been a treating her so.